Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live stream, whether you're watching this on YouTube or on Rumble. Today's stream is going to be about the new map of Syria, the surrendering of the Kurdish-led SDF to the Jolani and Turkish-led HTS and his affiliated forces. I will give you some historical context and I will tell you why all this happened and what we are going to anticipate in the Syrian Arab Republic for the next years. I have to make a disclaimer and announcement at the beginning of this live streaming. The Kurds have always been, in my eyes, good people. I'm talking about ordinary people. Back in the day when I was in Aleppo, my clothings used to be mostly from the Kurdish neighborhood Sheikh Maqsoud, where they used to bring foreign or even Turkish clothings. So people who wanted to spoil themselves and not to dress Syrian, and this was not the best thing to do, of course, back in the day, they used to go to Sheikh Maqsoud and buy some Turkish products. The Kurds, in my eyes, have great civilization. They have different languages, of course. They're not homogeneous. However, they are mostly united, especially when you live in the diaspora, when you live outside of Syria. You will see that Kurds always come for each other. Where I live here, as a foreigner who has a beard, I don't go to German barbers because usually German barbers do not really know how to trim a beard. I go to Kurdish barbers. And the Kurds are always a net positive. Like even when they come to Europe, for example, they don't make troubles, usually. They probably do not assimilate, but they're not like problematic community. I like the Kurds. I think the Kurds are great people. I love their food. I love their generosity. I love their music, which sometimes resonates with Armenian music. That being said, in the past 14 years, I have disagreed with the Kurdish-led SDF. I was on the opposite side of SDF. And many among the Kurds, they thought that I'm their enemy. And they always criticized me. And they called me an Assadist. And it was really tough for me because I never saw the Kurds an enemy. When the regime change happened, many Kurds found, let's say, mutual ground with me because I'm against Jolani and they are against Jolani. But that doesn't mean that I supported their political approach and military approach in Syria. I always believed in a one united Syrian Arab Republic, although I'm not an Arab. And I believe that the Kurds can be equal citizens, and they were equal citizens under the constitution. Actually, the Kurds had more rights than myself as a Christian. A Kurdish person could have become a president in Syria, for example, theoretically, under the previous regime. Meanwhile, I couldn't as a Christian. It was not allowed. The war in Syria, which started in 2011, in the first 2 years, the former Syrian government under Assad has given tangible support to the Kurds to protect their towns and their neighborhoods in Aleppo, in Afrin, in Azaz, in Manbij, in Ain al-Arab, Kobani, in Hasakah, in Qamishli. However, as the war evolved and Turkey opened the borders for the multinational Takfiri jihadists from all around the world, and Syria started losing ground when the Operation Timber Sycamore started to advance, and Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and others funneled tens of billions worth of weapons, ammunition, training for the jihadi groups, the former Syrian Arab army retreated from several places in the north on the borders with Turkey, and especially in the east, in Hasakah, Deir, ez-Zor, Qamishli. And when that happened, the Kurds found themselves by themselves. The Syrian army couldn't support the Kurds the way they used to. During this time, we are talking between 2013 to 2015, the United States came as a power to fill the vacuum of the Syrian army and started arming and supporting some of these Kurdish groups in Syria. Now, the turning point in Syria was in 2015. In 2015, when ISIS advanced from Palmyra to Damascus, and they were inside Damascus neighborhoods, and when Russia intervened with its aerial bombardment campaign against ISIS convoys stretching from Palmyra to Damascus, and from Palmyra to Raqqa, and from Raqqa to Turkey, and also from Deir ez-Zor to Turkey, where ISIS hordes used to sell the Syrian oil to the Turkish markets in exchange for dollars. This was when the Americans realized that ISIS, which they used as a proxy force on the ground, whether you like it or not, just like they used al-Nusra, the Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria, as a proxy in a different geography, or some people may say, at least they turned a blind eye. There is no person with objective mind can deny the fact that ISIS sent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fuel tankers from Syria to Turkey, which is a NATO country. Meanwhile, the so-called US-led coalition against ISIS was active since 2013. So during these 2 years, ISIS sent thousands of oil tankers to Turkey and made hundreds of millions of dollars from the Syrian oil. So the question is, why the United States allowed that to happen? Meanwhile, its F-16s were flying over northern Syria. Well, the answer is because they wanted to weaken Assad to the extent that he would compromise. And this was said by John Kerry in October 2015, when he met with Syrian opposition figures back in the day, and somebody was recording it, and he said that we were watching the advance of ISIS from Palmyra to Damascus, and we thought this is a good idea because then we could exert pressure on Assad and force him to compromise. But instead of compromising, they got Putin on his side. Now, when Putin intervened and started bombarding these ISIS convoys, and the defenses and the structural hierarchy of the ISIS started to get destroyed by this aerial bombardment campaign by Russia, and ISIS started to lose ground and retreat from eastern Syria, from Raqqa, the Americans intervened and changed the plan. Notice the coincidences, and those are not coincidences, by the way. In September 2015, the Russian Air Force intervened, and the Syrian army started to advance against ISIS and al-Nusra positions. 1 month later, the US formed the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, led by the Kurds. And during that time, of course, SDF did great fighting against ISIS and pushed them back from many regions and many front lines in Raqqa, in Deir ez-Zor, in Qamishli, in Hasakah. So, credit for them. But the SDF budget was from the Pentagon. Therefore, this was practically an American proxy force. If there is any military force, A, B, C, regardless, I have nothing against the SDF, against the Turks, against the Kurds. But when the military's budget comes from the Pentagon, and if or when the interests of these planners in the US change, then there is the possibility that they would abandon the Kurds. And this is what happened now in Syria. So when Syria, former Syria, fought against ISIS in Aleppo, Idlib, Hama, Homs, Damascus, Daraa, etc., the Kurds were doing the fighting on the eastern side of Syria. So when ISIS was officially degraded into few pockets in the deserts, the contact line between the Syrian Arab Army, the former one, and the SDF has become the Euphrates River. So this was the contact line where on the eastern bank of the Euphrates, there are the Kurds, and on the western part of the Euphrates, there were the Syrian army. But the SDF on the eastern bank of the Euphrates was embedded with the American occupation forces. And the American occupation forces occupied the oil fields of Syria, around 50%. So during the time of the sanctions against Syria and the suffocation of the Syrian economy, Syria needed its oil. And SDF didn't allow that. Americans basically used SDF as a battering ram against the former Syria, against the Assad government. They used them to suffocate the Syrian economy, to keep the country divided, to disallow the former Syrian government to reconstruct, and basically do regime change. And the leadership of SDF went alongside the Americans in this project. Although Damascus, back in the day, offered the SDF administrative decentralization, which they could basically manage their own administrative affairs, including education and language. But the leaders of SDF said that that is not enough. And what they want is political decentralization. And again, the Assad government rejected that. And the SDF was so stubborn to the extent that they waited for the Assad regime to be gone, thinking that the Americans will finally give them what they want, and that is political centralization. And they have misread the region, they have misread the room, as we say, and the political climate in West Asia and the Middle East, not knowing that Turkey, at the end of the day, as the biggest army in NATO, would not allow for the Kurds to have a decentralized political entity in north and northeast of Syria, adjacent to the Turkish territory, which, if it happens, if the political decentralization succeeds in Syria, it will reflect on Turkey. And the Kurds will ask for similar decentralization. And they are how many? 20 million? Turkey, during this time, was transforming its political nature or political color, of course, during all this time, from a secular republic into a more Islamic country. And under this Islamic country and Islamic identity that Erdogan has been championing in the past two decades, at least in the past 2 decades, was saying basically, look, we are Turks, and we Turks are Muslims, Muslim Sunnis, and you, the Kurds, are also Muslim Sunnis, or some of them, or many of them. So let's not focus on what divides us, and that is the ethnicity, and focus on what unites us, and that is religion. Therefore, the Turkish Islamic identity that Erdogan has revived has seen or tried to convince the Kurds that they're also part of this identity. They're also part of this Turkish neo-Ottoman Commonwealth system, which Erdogan is trying to establish. Now, in the past 2 years, if you saw what Erdogan has achieved inside Turkey with Öcalan and the PKK and the YPG and the YPD, there were several attempts to reconcile with them until the point when Öcalan disavowed the armed struggle against Turkey. And this was a strong indication that the Kurds and the leadership of the Kurdish parties inside Turkey, they have chosen the path of non-confrontation again with Erdogan. And whether that is the correct approach or not, it's irrelevant, because when you see as a Syrian Kurd, as Mazloum Abdi, as SDF, what is happening in Turkey, and Turkey as a neighboring country, this will reflect again in one way or another on Syria. Now, Tom Barak, who is this ambassador in Turkey and also American ambassador in Turkey, and at the same time the US special envoy to Syria, he is close to Erdogan and he's close to Qatar. And it is quite clear from the statements in the past 1 year that the Americans do not want decentralized Syria, but they want a centralized Syria. And why do they want that? Because in the eyes of the Americans, they need one united Syria where they can call one person, one sheriff, one puppet, and one person who can put signature on strategic agreements and also manage the affairs in Syria, instead of creating a decentralized Syria where you have different spheres of influence, and this allows other regional powers to invest in these different spheres of influence, and then different powers would have leverage over the discourse of the political life, the economic life in Syria. Tom Barak went to the further when he was in Qatar a few weeks ago and said, forget about democracy. We have been trying to impose democracy on Syria for a long time, and it doesn't work. And what works best in the region is benevolent monarchies. And I explained to you that 2 days later, Jolani went to the Umayyad Mosque and he gave a speech telling his people, obey me as I obey God in you. So basically, he brought Islamic literature into the political discourse similar to Erdogan's Turkey. So what is happening in Syria is basically the integration of Syria into the Turkish political climate. And the Americans believe that this could work the best for the region, right? In any ways, the Kurds have received a big setback. Now, they've been betrayed by the Americans, but I'm not surprised at all. And this is not the right time for blame game, right? People have died, people lost their properties, people lost their dreams. But many people have warned you that this is going to be the outcome, and the Americans will abandon you in exchange for political compromise with Turkey. And this has now happened. And the Kurdish people, of course, are rightfully so angry. But in my opinion, you have to be angry at your leadership. Your leadership has linked its fate to the fate of America. You have become dependent on American decision-making. And the evidence for it is overwhelming, that between 2015, let's say actively 2016 to 2024, the Syrian army has occupied the contact line on the Euphrates River, and the Kurdish forces, were on the eastern bank of the Euphrates. And at no point the Americans allowed the Syrian army to cross the Euphrates River and occupy an inch on the eastern bank of the Euphrates. So the Americans disallowed and blocked the Syrian Arab armies' attempt to take over all the territories of Syria, and the Kurds have embedded themselves with the American occupation forces for this purpose. So these forces blocked Syria's access to the fuel, blocked Syria's access to the wheat, and occupied large swaths of territories, including border crossings with Iraq, embedded themselves with the American occupation forces with the hope that they would get political decentralization. And now what they got is less than administrative decentralization, something that Assad presented them, told them, here is the administrative decentralization, and they rejected it. And they said, no, we want political decentralization. Now they didn't get political decentralization or autonomy, and they didn't get administrative one. What they got is complete defeat and surrender to the Jolani hordes. This is what the Kurds got from this. Basically nothing. I will show you the map of control over Syria today, just for us to know what are we talking about. Syria. So this is what is left for the Kurds now. This map is from a website called syria.liveuamap.com, right? Some people all ask me, where do I bring this map? So do you see this is the Euphrates River? All this line till Al-Qaim here. So the region, this entire region here was in the hands of the SDF. And they have been pushed back now into Ain al-Arab or Kobani here. And they're even losing al-Hasakah city, as you see. So this is Syria now. The entire green is in the hands of Jolani and Turkey, basically, and his backers in the United States. Sweda is the only region where they got some sort of autonomy from Jolani, because the Israelis have intervened and they bombed Jolani and they imposed here. This is the Golan Heights, by the way, occupied by Israel, and this is the newly occupied territories after the fall of Assad. And as you can see, the Israelis are also occupying the eastern borders of Lebanon. And why do they do that? Because those are high hills here, and they can overlook now inside Lebanon. So by occupying these high hills here, not only Damascus is under the firing range of the Israelis, but also Hezbollah is basically isolated, because here on the northern borders of Israel, of course, they have their forces, and now they are also overlooking inside Raqqa and Hasakah from the hills inside Syria, something that Jolani has done nothing about it yet. So this is the map of control over Syria, guys. This is the new map of Syria, and unfortunately, I believe that Hasakah will also be gone from the Kurds soon. And the Kurds have lost everything. Have lost everything. Hezb is in South Lebanon, and Raqqa and Hasakah is also in South Lebanon, my friend. Israel has basically intel and overlooking all Lebanon from this place. I don't know what to say. So this agreement between SDF and Jolani says the following. There is a comprehensive ceasefire agreement now in effect. They agreed to return the provinces of Raqqa and Deir to full state sovereignty, which is under Jolani. They agreed to hand over the files of detainees and those suspected of belonging to ISIS to the Syrian government of the Jolani regime. and the Jolani regime will manage the prisoners and ISIS family camps. Good luck. They will integrate all civilian institutions in al-Hasakah governorate into the Syrian state institutions. So, of course, Jolani will continue its push of SDF from Hasakah city as well. The Jolani regime will take over of all border crossings and oil and gas fields to ensure the return of resources to the state. Now, Jolani doesn't have any excuses to keep the country poor and devastated. No more sanctions, and he has control over the oil fields. Let's see what excuses he will create. The agreement also says that the SDF elements will integrate into the so-called Syrian Ministry of Defense structures on an individual basis after the necessary security checks and ensuring the privacy of Kurdish areas. The Jolani regime will issue a presidential decree to appoint a governor in Hasakah. Probably they will appoint a Kurd who is close to the Jolani regime. They will remove all heavy weapons from Ain al-Arab Kobani, and they will form local security forces under the Ministry of Interior because this is on the borders with Turkey. So they will basically confiscate all the heavy weapons, and they will approve a list of candidates from the SDF to be appointed in the Syrian state. So in Arabic, we say, Billah alaykum. After 11 years of SDF, what positive impact has the SDF brought to the Kurds? They have devastated the former Syrian state, and now they have gained nothing. And many Kurds nowadays are, I will show you some. So is my frame frozen, my friends? Can somebody please confirm? Because I'm moving here and I can see myself moving on the screen, but if there is something frozen, please let me know. It is back now. Please, guys, let me know in the comments if the picture is frozen, okay? For us to understand a little bit or to give some context to this, everything that happened in the past 2 weeks, from removing SDF and Asayish presence from Aleppo to pushing back the SDF elements from Raqqa, Deir, ez-Zor, and now Hasakah, all this was agreed upon 2 weeks ago in Paris. In Paris, the Syrian side some people say frozen. If you give me just 10 seconds, I will fix it, okay? So let's see if this works now. So everything was agreed upon 2 weeks ago when the Jolani regime, the American officials, the Tombarak, the Israelis, and the Turks met in Paris, right? Some people say you have not frozen, Kevork. I don't know why people say that. I truly don't know if some people say really in the chat that I'm frozen. So they agreed in Paris that Israel and Turkey will draw some lines in the country. So the entire north now is in the hands of the Israelis, and the south, the Israeli in the hands of the Turks, and the south, the Israelis have imposed a demilitarized zone 60 kilometers from the Golan Heights all the way to Damascus, and the Turks have eliminated all Kurdish militants from the borders. So it's a win-win for Israel and Turkey in Syria. Unfortunately, I don't know what to say really. Sometimes it's just better not to say anything. So the PYD chapter is closed, my friends. The support from the US to PYD was entirely aimed at destroying Assad's Syria. It was about depriving Assad of natural resources and grain. Once this was achieved, the PYD's existence became unnecessary. Furthermore, Israel doesn't want a fragmented Syria without destruction of Iran and Hezbollah. A fully surrendered Jolani is more convenient for their security. In a fragmented Syria, it is easier for Iran, Hezbollah to gain influence and threaten Israel than it was in Jolani, Syria. This is some analysis from our friend Sermal. Now, for you guys to know, the Jolani regime, apparently, they're also letting some of these ISIS prisoners out. Here you go, word. You get what you deserve. Your beloved Syrian president and fellow jihadists are releasing ISIS prisoners. So these are the... Look at these people who are being released, unfortunately, from the prisons. And imagine what will happen to the Syrian society if these people come back to so-called daily life, to robbery, to killing, to kidnappings, to their integration into the so-called Syrian security forces. Lots of things will happen in the country. And I don't understand what is so... this is just for you to see. This is, by the way, Syrian government troops or Jolani troops tear down a women's protection unit or Kurdish women forces statue in northeast of Syria. This is the end of autonomous Kurdish-led region in Syria, which has existed for a decade. The US withdrew its support from the SDF and the Kurds. And this woman has been fighting with ISIS, against ISIS in the past, and she got killed. So they made a statue of her. And now they are taking it down, tearing it down. It's too late now, but wasn't it better for the Kurdish leaders to agree with Assad and live with us, people who didn't want to suppress or exterminate the Kurds as an ethnicity, than now being ruled and subjugated and oppressed by the Jolani regime and these takfiris? Which one was better? And you could have gotten administrative autonomy in your own regions. You would have been able to teach Kurdish, and your administrative centers, the government buildings, would have been also the communication in Kurdish. And you would have celebrated your Kurdish rituals, Eids, Easterns, or Nuruz and others. And many Kurds would have gotten also Syrian citizenship, especially those who came later as refugees in the 60s. Those who fled from Iraq and fled from Turkey, they came to Syria, they didn't get Syrian citizenship. Now, like, why I'm being speechless in this stream, because what I do is basically I analyze on this channel, right? And this is just a commentary show now today, this live streaming. And I'm being speechless because wrong approaches lead into suicide, basically. And some people have better strategic view than others. And some people warned the Kurds, the Kurdish leadership, that this is going to happen to you. Don't bet on the Americans. There is a famous saying for Hosni Mubarak, the former Egyptian president, who said, those whose only cover is America they get cold. المتغطي بالامريكان I think he said المتغطي بالامريكي بردان or عريان. Like if your only cover is America, you're naked. Assad warned them, you called him names, and Nasrallah warned you, you also called him names. This is a harsh criticism of SDF by Hussein Aygun. He wrote it in Turkish. I think he is Kurdish as well, or he's an Alevi from Turkey. He said, last year, when Jolani and his blood-stained gang committed genocide against Alevis in Syria, the UN Security Council sprang into action, and these killers were caught red-handed. The killers were trying to strengthen their power by pretending to appease the West, but they couldn't control the Takfiri barbarism within them. While we awaited the murderer Jolani caught in the act at the crime scene to be held accountable at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Mazloum Abdi came to his rescue. This is true, by the way. This was when Jolani was committing massacres against the Alawites in Syria. And while he was committing a massacre, Mazloum Abdi came to Damascus, shook hands with him, and he agreed on the integration of SDF into the so-called Syrian army. Before the funerals of Alevi children could even be collected from the beaches, he struck a deal with that bloodthirsty killer, and photos were promptly released. The message to the world was, look, Jolani has made a deal with the Kurds, just as you wanted. Give this man a chance. I had written that the blood-stained murderer called Jolani had previously refused to even pose for photos with Mazloum Abdi, that this draft agreement had been on the table for months, that it was rushed to Damascus solely to save Jolani, and that the real aim was to take the Alevi genocide off the agenda and rescue the murderer Jolani. I faced complaints from many Kurdish friends and even absurd accusations of being a Kurdish enemy. So what did Jolani do? The man Abdi rescued by holding his hand yesterday and turned into a legitimate counterpart with those photos. He bided his time to regroup. When he handed over southern Syria to Israel as a hush money payoff, creating a suitable ground to attack the Kurds, he did to the Kurds what he had done to the Alevis and Druze. Kurds died in Arab regions for America, stood guard over America's oil for a pittance. Even people like me who know nothing about the region knew they couldn't fight in those areas and would be stabbed in the back. The deal being imposed now is Turkey's Syria. In other words, individual rights without constitutional, military, or international guarantees. Everyone knows this amount to nothing. Everyone also knows that annihilation is merely a matter of time. The Turkey model is being applied to Syria. That's what is happening. Yeah, it's the Turkification of Syria. You know who is the happiest? This is the happiest person now in Syria. And Rajib Soylo, who is a trumpet for Erdogan, of course, he's sharing this now because, I mean, he's right. Erdogan right now is doing like this. I would like to say respect for him, but I despise that guy, but his strategy is working in Syria. His strategy is working. There is an analysis posted by Alon Mizrahi. He is an ex-Israeli anti-Zionist Arab Jew who posted on his account something that is, I have to shed light on this because I think this analysis is incorrect. Alon says, I don't know why so many pundits and analysts fail to connect the dots and see the bigger picture here. I really find it funny when people really want to see the bigger picture and then come with the most ridiculous analysis you have my eyes ever seen. He says the expulsion of the SDF is not an internal Syrian affairs. I think this is the only thing that is correct. but part of a much larger, and may I say, historic change in West Asia. What we are seeing is the emergence of a new Sunni anti-colonial, anti-Western, anti-Zionist force in West Asia, headed by Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, with Egypt joining in. I have never seen anything like this before, guys, but according to our friend Alon, which we are, of course, criticizing respectfully, his analysis, he thinks that there is a new Sunni anti-colonial, anti-Western, and anti-Zionist alliance in formation headed by Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And he thinks that this is deeply connected with Saudi moves in Africa and the Horn of Africa against the Israel-UAE alliance to take over the Red Sea and natural resources. This is neither led nor approved by the US. So he's basically saying the push against the SDF was not approved by the United States, but an authentic regional process brought about by two political systems that are more empowered and confident than they have been in many decades. This is a powerful counter to Zionist aspirations in West Asia. The result of the genocide in Gaza has not been a strengthening of Israel, but the opposite. Now the axis of resistance has another and very powerful layer that is equally committed to stifling and neutralizing Zionist aspirations. I'm telling you, this is history in the making, and the Islamic civilization beginning to truly raise its head and seek its deserving place in the world. I lamented the fall of Assad because I dreaded a scenario in which Syria became so weak that Israel began to expand into it, which would never have worked anyway. But if Syria is used by Turkey and Saudi Arabia to reassert the people of the region against Western imperialism, I'm very much relieved. With Arab and Muslim countries gradually letting go of Israel and organizing together to stop it, the prospects of Zionism are only getting dimmer. It is no longer only the responsibility of Iran, Hezbollah, and Yemen to resist Zionism. It is returning to be the collective Arab and Islamic stance, and that's an amazing development. My friend Alon, see this hand here? In this hand, I would cut them both if you are correct. I would cut them both. And you know that time will tell if what we are seeing is an anti-Zionist alliance, emergence of a new anti-Zionist alliance, or a pro-Zionist alliance. Alon, for God's sake, 2 weeks ago, Jolani's foreign minister was in Paris, and he met with an Israeli delegation with the mediation of the Americans and the Turks, and they agreed to normalize ties. Israel will open an office in Damascus for trade and tourism with Syria. Israel and Syria, under Jolani, will build a tourist resort in Al-Qunaytira, which is a ski resort. It's a joint project. The south of Syria, between the Golan Heights to Damascus, will be a demilitarized zone and an area for foreign investors to come and invest, including Israeli investors. This is the most delusional analysis I have ever seen in my life. Jolani is the man of the Americans, is the man of Turkey, is the man of Qatar. Okay. At some point, some people come and say, but the Israelis may be fearful of this Islamic country in formation in Syria. The problem with this argument is that the Jolani regime has let the Israelis destroy all of Syria's strategic weaponry, including the air defenses. And no power in the region is willing or allowed to provide Jolani any weapons capable of posing any tangible or meaningful threat against Israel, including Turkey, including Saudi Arabia. Nobody is interested in conflict with Israel on Syrian territories. What they are interested is to finish the Palestine conflict once and for all in cooperation and collaboration with the Jolani regime, who kicked out all the Palestinian factions from Syria, arrested the leadership of the Palestinian leadership who refused to hand over their weapons, has handed over the belongings and probably the remnants of Eddie Cohen, the famous Israeli spy who was captured in Syria in the 60s. He allowed Israel to impose a demilitarized zone 60 kilometers deep inside Syrian territories. He handed over the Golan Heights to Israel. Like in the Paris meeting, if you read the articles, they say Syria demands Israel to withdraw from the territories they occupied after the 4th of December 2024, which means on the night of the removal of Assad. So the line that the current Jolani regime is calling for, of the borders of Syria, is not the Golan Heights, is not the Golan, but rather the newly occupied territories after the fall of Assad, which means they have already given up on the Golan. And the new map of Syria, which the Jolani regime published on its own foreign ministry page, they excluded the Golan from the map. So what are you even talking about? In addition to this, he says the Americans didn't approve on this project, right? Like, Tom Barak was in Damascus. Tom Barak was in Damascus yesterday. Like, he was in Damascus yesterday while the Jolani forces were pushing against SDF. Like, this photo is just yesterday. What is he even talking about? Tom Barak was in Damascus yesterday, standing next to Jolani while the SDF was being pushed back. This was a Turkish-American move approved by Saudi Arabia and Israel. They don't want multiple phones in Syria. They want one puppet. I explain it here. So this is what happened, in my opinion. The United States, Turkey, and Israel have effectively given Jolani's militias the green light to move on SDF-held areas in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. This isn't the moment for the blame game, but God is our witness. America was always going to abandon the Kurds. Again, the only real option was unity with the Syrian army against the Al-Qaeda hordes. That window is now closed. With Syria's army dismantled, Washington wants a single address, a single phone call or single phone number, and a single obedient proxy, not multiple centers of power. Tom Barak said the quiet part out loud. What works in West Asia are benevolent monarchies, and the puppet monarch in waiting is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. And God is our witness, because nobody can say we didn't warn the Kurds. And this was Bashar in 2019. He told the Kurds, he said, the Americans will not protect you. They will use and trade you.
نقول لهذه المجموعات التي تراهن على الأمريكي أن الأمريكي لن يحميكم.
Will not protect you.
الأمريكي لن يضعكم.
The Americans will not put you in their heart.
لا في قلبه ولا في حضنه.
And they will not put you on their lap.
الأمريكي سيضعكم في جيبه لكي تكون.
America will put you in their pocket.
جيبه لكي تكونوا أداة المقايضة مع الدولارات التي يحملها، وهو بدأ بالمقايضة. إذا لم تحضروا أنفسكم للدفاع عن بلدكم وللمقاومة فلن تكونوا سوى عبيد.
So, if you don't get ready to defend your country, you will be a slave of the Americans and the Turks. And this is what the Kurds have become nowadays. This is the prophecy. The problem with the Syrian mentality is, including the Kurds, everybody thinks narrow. Everybody thinks that what it matters only is their community, what matters is their ethnicity, what matters is their sect, what matters is their neighborhood, what matters is their clan, what matters is their tribe. There is no national identity which everybody was like feeling like they belong to. Everybody thinks narrow. This was a war imposed on all of us for 14 years. And we should have fought together against this al-Qaeda hordes. And I'm not saying like everybody should have carried guns and fought, but people, even with their words, with their pens, with their social media accounts, with their journalistic work, with their digital word, with public relations, with lobbying, with any type of work, including fighting, we should have done this together. Syria, as a secular state, was a guarantor for the cultural, religious, and sectarian rights of everyone. You disagree with the politics of Syria, that's something we could discuss. But holding the Syria's oil as leverage and as hostage and not allowing the Syrian army to move on the eastern bank of the Euphrates and embed yourself with the Americans and bet on the American project in Syria for the hope of receiving political decentralization in the future. Meanwhile, the former government has already given you administrative autonomy or decentralization, the right to teach in Kurdish, the right to speak in Kurdish in the administrative centers. What do you want more than that? You want political autonomy? Okay, you continued on this approach. Just think about it logically. How would Turkey accept a political autonomy for you on the borders with Turkey when they have 20 million Kurds in their own country? We had mutual enemy. We should have shielded the borders. We should have cooperated against this al-Qaeda hordes. Now, you will not receive an administrative autonomy. You will not receive political autonomy, and you will be subjugated. They will humiliate you. This is what this mindset is about, this neo-Ottoman mindset. Remember, back in the day, when the massacres against the Alevis, the Alawites, the Kurds, the Christians, the Armenians, the Greeks happened under the Ottoman and also the Young Turk government, they used to humiliate us and you and the rest by stepping our necks and calling us and telling us to bark. And nowadays, you see what the Jolani people are doing to the Kurds, to the Alawites, to the Druze, to the Christians, to anyone that they despise. Even on social media platforms, there is not a single Jolani supporter who doesn't come to your social media account if you disagree with them. Everybody comes to your account, those Jolani supporters, and ask you to bark. Because this is what they see us. This is how they see us. They are supremacists. They are racists. They are the worst type of racists. Right? I have never seen so much hatred in anybody's heart than the people who support Jolani. I have never seen. Those who call themselves, we are the Umayyads nowadays in Syria, those are the people who are the worst racists I have ever seen in my life. I have not, like people come and tell me, oh, in Europe, they're racist against us. In America, they're racist. No, Habibi. Everybody has some certain level of racism against some people or some ethnicity or some religion. But I have never seen people who hate everyone who is outside, not their religion, not their sect, outside their ideology. And they would like to subjugate them, humiliate them. They're sadistic. They enjoy seeing you, watching you in pain. Those are the people your leadership celebrated in the SDF. They put the flag of this so-called revolution in the background. Big mistake. Unfortunately, it's too late, but I can show you some examples of the Kurdish accounts. This is the Rojava Press. Look what they say. This Rojava Press, he says, as an opponent of the Bashar al-Assad regime since my childhood and having hated him since 2004 because of the arrest of all my relatives, and to be honest, I say Bashar al-Assad and his thugs were hundreds of times more honorable than the foundling al-Jolani and his thugs. For you will never see in your entire lives anything worse and more pathetic than the ISIS criminal terrorist Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, nor his thug hypocrites who used to bark here and there and wail during the time of Bashar. And now they are doing what even Bashar didn't do. Bashar had foresight and knew well the composition of these lowly terrorists. Yeah, but too late, ya Habibi, too late. Too late. There are several accounts I have seen talking about that. So, this is the map of Syria again, guys. Do you think that the Jolani regime will push further and occupy the rest of these yellow places? Will he impose his will and power over entire map of Syria? Do you think all these yellow places will go green again? And if they go green again, or if the Kurds continue staying in this place, what is going to happen to the coastal cities? I say nothing. There is no special status for the Alawites. There is no federalism. There is no autonomy for them in the coast. This is with the end of the Kurdish project in the east. It also means a big blow for any hope for the Alawites if they wanted to gain their administrative or political autonomy or federalism in the coastal cities. This is finished. So what is going to happen to Sweden now? The Druze are here. They're supported by Israel. It's a very big mess, my friends, very big mess. But let me know your opinions in the comment below. What do you want me to cover tomorrow, my friends? Do you want me to have another Iranian guest on the show from Iran or outside of Iran? Do you recommend someone other than Marandi? Of course, we had him last week. I would like to speak with Iranians who are probably in the middle. They don't support the Islamic Republic, let's say, or they're not pro-IRGC or pro-Khamenei, but at the same time, they don't like what the opposition is doing. If you know someone that we could have with him interesting conversation, if he is, let's say, someone who is in the middle, objective, he dislikes Israeli intervention and American intervention, but he has his opposition to the current system, I don't mind. I would really enjoy such a conversation. Nima doesn't come to my show, and he never invited me to my show anyways. I want someone probably in the diaspora who has brain, who would like to participate in this conversation. Until then, my friends, if you like my stream, please hit the like button, thumbs up before leaving this stream. I would really appreciate it. And also subscribe to Syriana Analysis. 500 people are watching it only on YouTube. I would really appreciate it if you do that. And if you like to support this independent work, please become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis, or there are different other means in the description below. When I finish this stream, after I finish this stream, not in the live chat, please write some of the names that you recommend me to host tomorrow or after tomorrow. I would like to have a conversation with an Iranian who is probably in opposition to the current system in Iran, but at the same time, he is not one of these crazy monarchists who would like for the US and Israel to intervene in their own country. I wish you peace, my friends. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Ali Zada is great, by the way. Yes, I have contacted him already. Ali Zada, he didn't respond to me yet, but I will insist on him. So thank you so much, guys, for tuning in, and I will see you tomorrow. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.